Hi, welcome. My name's Andy. Thanks for joining me for this video. We're going to look at a brilliant passage from Luke. Quite a well-known one, but one that is really challenging, really good, really deep. Luke 18, 9 to 14. Sometimes called the parable of the tax collector and the Pharisee and the tax collector. Sometimes called the parable of the two toll collectors, which is quite an interesting thing. But it begins with a really interesting introduction. I wonder, are you a snob? Are you snobbish? It's not a very nice word. It's a pretty horrible thing to ask, and I really hope you're not. But this is basically where the parable is aimed at for snobs. Luke begins it by saying Jesus told a parable to people who thought that they were better than others, thought that they were righteous and despised others. So if there's an element of snobbishness in you or in me, we need to listen up. We need to listen up to the good news. So the story is two people went to the temple to pray. One of them was a Pharisee. We're going to represent him by this koala. And the Pharisee says he stood by himself and he went to the temple to pray. We think this would be in the afternoon when there would be a sacrifice for atonement. Now he didn't really think he needed atonement. He stood up and said, I fast twice a week. So he prayed to God, told God, as if God didn't know, that he fasted twice a week. And fasting was something that you only had to do once a year, actually, as a Jew, on the Day of Atonement. Atonement means coming together with God at one-ment. Is one way to think of it. So the Pharisee kind of thought he was already there. He fasted twice a week for atonement. He kind of thought he was with God already. So he stands up and he prays aloud, and he prays that he thanks God that he's not like the other person who was also standing on his own, but probably nearer to the entrance, on kind of the fringes of things. And this guy was a toll collector. And what that meant was his job was, on behalf of someone else, he would have to collect, well, basically extort money from people. The way the system worked, if you were, say, I don't know, a wealthy landowner, you would sell a contract to extract tolls for people who went through your land, say. And someone who was quite wealthy would buy the contract for a certain amount of money, and then they would be free to go for it to kind of screw as much money out of people as they could. And once they'd paid off the initial amount they paid for the contract, anything else was their profit. But they didn't want to do the dirty work. They farmed that out to people like this chap, who would sit in a booth. When anyone came by, he would try his best to get as much money out of them as possible. It wasn't tax, it wasn't a regulated thing. This was just trying to get money out of people, and that was his job. It wasn't a good job. This was one of the worst jobs in the society. And it put him in a really bad religious position. To be atoned, to come back to God, you had to make reparations when you had extorted money from people. But this guy couldn't, because the money went off further up the chain, and in any case the people were passing through. He couldn't repay them. So he was trapped in a position where he was separated from God because of his job, and there was nothing he could do about it. So this guy, the Pharisee, in his very self-righteous prayer, he says, I thank God that I am not like other people like this. And he names three things, three sins, which we're going to unpack because they're really fascinating. He says, firstly, I thank you that I'm not a swindler like this guy. But there's an irony, because the Pharisees also extracted money from people on top of their taxes, a temple tax. People had to pay a tax for the upkeep of the temple and the priests. Whether you lived in the farther northern reaches of the country in Galilee, or wherever you lived, you still had to pay the temple tax, and these people collected it. The temple was enormously wealthy. It had huge, very, very imposing building. The priests lived quite a cushy lifestyle. So actually, he was in the same situation. He was taking money from people which went to the wealthy. So he's not so different. The second word is unrighteous. In English translations, we often translate that differently, but the original one is literally unrighteous. He said that this guy is unrighteous. He's the opposite of being atoned. He's separated from God. But as we see, actually, the Pharisee is also unrighteous. He's separated from God too. And the third word is adulterer. He says, I thank God that I'm not an adulterer, or like this tax collector. And although adultery may well mean what we would understand it to mean today, cheating on your married partner, there's a tradition going way back through the prophets, particularly in Ezekiel and Hosea, that the adultery of people is a way of describing someone who's not faithful to God. So it's not just cheating on your partner, it also counts as cheating on God. So it's tied up with idolatry, going off and doing your own version of religion, which is what we come to see that he has done. So there's a really funny irony here that this guy, the Pharisee, he levels 3 abuses at the tax collector, but actually he's guilty of all of them. He's a swindler, he's unrighteous, and he's an adulterer. So the twist in the tale is that this guy, the tax collector, the one who could not be atoned with God, the one who couldn't come back to God, who thought he was separate, he couldn't even look to heaven. I've chosen a panda because he looks quite sad-eyed. He couldn't even look to heaven. He beat his breast and he said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Literally, the word was, God, atone me, a sinner. He wanted to come back to God. And the funny thing is, he didn't do it the regular way. He didn't do it through the temple priests. He prayed directly. He bypassed the whole of the temple system. And the twist in the tale is that Jesus said that this man, went home righteous. This one was restored righteous. This one was left out, didn't come back to God. Now that was shocking because people hated these toll collectors. They thought they were the lowest of the low. But everything gets turned around. Even this one, even the vilest offender can truly believe. So, when we find ourselves in this sort of position, when we think that we're righteous, when we're connected to God, and that other people aren't, for whatever reason, this parable should make us stop and think. And it's brilliant good news, because if this guy can be at one with God, then anyone can. It's not it's not necessarily the Pharisee can never learn, can never get it right, could never be at one. But it shows that the breadth of God's mercy extends even to those who shouldn't, on the face of it, deserve it. Couldn't repay the debts and couldn't repay the money that he had swindled. Didn't seem to matter to Jesus. He forgave. The irony is, neither of these two people really understood who God was. This one thought God was impressed by the things that you did, by the fasting, by the paying a tithe on everything you earned. He thought God was impressed by what we did. Not so much. This one thought that God he couldn't even look God in the eye. He thought that God saw him as a sinner, as separate. Not true. Jesus made him the hero of the story. So both of them kind of had a misconception of God. God is neither impressed by the things that we do. God is neither, He's not put off by the brokenness and badness in our lives, he still loves us as a child. It was this one who went home righteous. So, may you know, whether you're tempted to snobbery, whether you're tempted towards thinking that you're undeserving, may we all know that we're all children of God, and that God's mercy and grace is boundless and unstoppable. Okay, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye bye.